at their seats. I have the ranking member from Virginia here. Is that okay? The committee will now consider H.R. 1232, the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1232, a bill to amend Titles 40, 41, and 44 United States Code to...
Without objection, H.R. 1232 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any time. The text has already been distributed and it is in each of your folders. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. The House Budget Resolution crafted by Chairman Paul Ryan notes that the Federal Government spends about $80 billion each year on information technology. The GAO has identified broad acquisition failures, waste and unnecessary duplication in government information technology infrastructure. Experts estimate that eliminating these problems could save 25% or about $20 billion of the government's annual information technology budget. I would go further. I would say that the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Act, or FITAR, could in fact take that $80 billion in sum and save tenfold that in waste throughout government, in efficiency and delivery of services. And in fact, the proper acquisition and delivery of IT makes the rest of the government inherently more efficient. It is our intention through this Act and through the many hearings we have held and will continue to hold to leverage that exact position. Getting it right in IT is what allows us to get all the other requirements of government right. It is well past the time in which people should be in line for their government. It is in fact time to be online with your government. We have developed this important legislation in a transparent and collaborative fashion. We have posted our first draft of this legislation last September and posted updated draft last Thursday before dropping or introducing the bill on Monday. We received comments from numerous stakeholders, and much of the feedback is reflected in legislation that is before you today. Among other reforms, the bill increases budgetary authority and overall accountability of agency, and I use this term very carefully, Chief Information Officers, because the CIOs, in fact, are assumed to be the people running the show. Our legislation requires that in the future they also have the budget authority that allows them to truly run the show. It also designates assisted acquisition centers or centers of excellence. These centers of excellence would, in fact, be a way to go for one place that is doing well rather than each agency of government trying to do all things. These acquisition vehicles, when developed, will, in fact, show the government the best way to buy. Many have said this would be often GSA, and I agree it would be. But it also can be other parts of government that develop expertise, and many of them have been noted to us in our hearings. The stakes are very high. Federal IT procurement is massive, expensive enterprise, and in fact, for my entire life, practically since the point at which we began using computers, there have been interoperable problems and a claim of legacy systems being the problem. For decades, legacy systems are being the problem, so much so that today virtually every system has been replaced during the period in which we said legacy systems were the problem, and still today legacy systems are the problem. I appreciate that procurement law is a complicated and often arcane subject. I am grateful for the feedback for our legislation. The window of feedback, though, is not shut. I expect this legislation to undergo further refinement even after we report it out to the committee. But it is time to advance the bill to the next stage. I will recognize here today that there are a number of areas that have not been fully understood, and I will cite one of them. Our legislation tries to codify the understanding of open source software. That is not to promote open source. Open source is not an alternative to proprietary or hybrid software, but in fact in recognition that today many companies are operating appliances or even complete phone systems using entirely open source software, tells us that it has to be given the respect it deserves. Additionally, the kind of collaborative and fact-checking, software checking that goes on in open source also creates the greatest bed of reliable software on which to build a hybrid for Federal use. In order to put at the same level open source as proprietary software, we seek to find the right language. I will work with the community both in and out of government in the days to come to ensure that we find the right words to show open source is not greater nor more desirable than proprietary software, but it is in fact a viable and has been a viable source for software that the government has bought for virtually my entire life in government. For that reason, we are trying to find, promote, and create the best choices and a procedure based on the last bill we marked up to ensure that network security is also maintained while finding the best and most reasonably cost software. And with that, I recognize the Ranking Member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act is designed to eliminate unnecessary duplication by targeting numerous commonly used IT investments for streamlining. I agree with the Chairman that reforms are needed to ensure that the Federal Government makes effective and efficient investments in information technology. I also want to commend the Chairman for the bipartisan approach used to develop this legislation. We have had 2 full committee hearings on the concepts of this bill, and a draft of the bill was made available for comment prior to this markup. I also want to recognize Representative Jerry Connolly, the Ranking Member of the Government Operations Subcommittee, for his critical work on these technology issues. A significant portion of the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act is based on Ranking Member Connolly's legislation on consolidating Federal data centers. Last month, GAO issued its newest high-risk report, which lists several IT investments as being among the Federal Government's highest-risk investments. For instance, a contract to streamline the Army's inventory of weapon systems is more than 12 years behind schedule and almost $4 billion over budget. Effective oversight is one of the best weapons against this kind of wasteful spending. Congress has a duty to conduct oversight as well as an obligation to give agencies the tools they need to conduct their own oversight. Agencies need more well-trained acquisition management professionals to effectively oversee complex system acquisitions and to ensure that the government is a smart and diligent consumer. The Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act also recognizes this need by requiring OMB to submit a 5-year plan to develop, strengthen, and solidify IT acquisition cadres, which would include an implementation timeline. I urge the members to support this bill and yield back the balance.
I thank the gentleman. I will hold the record open until the end of the day for members to submit written statements. Does any member wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Couldn't you wait for an amendment? Just kidding. The gentleman is recognized to speak.
I don't have an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me thank you and your staff for the bipartisan manner in which you've approached this bill. We've been working together for many months trying to get it right and trying to hear from private industry, trying to hear from Federal agencies, trying to hear from our colleagues. And your staff has been professional on every step of the way. And I very much appreciate, Mr. Chairman, the way in which you and the staff have approached this issue, and I thank you for that. I also want to thank the Ranking Member. I've been a staffer and I've been a member of Congress now. And I have rarely worked with a colleague who has been such a gracious mentor and has been willing to allow his colleagues to pursue their areas of expertise. It is very special to be working with you, Mr. Cummings, and I thank you so much for your leadership. Mr. Chairman, I think you put your finger on the problem, which is that we don't manage IT all that well in the Federal Government, from procurement to contract management to legacy systems to new investments to the deployment of the assets we have. The Federal Government is a huge driver in IT procurement, and what it does or does not do makes a difference in the overall market, in the global market. And so getting it right is a special responsibility for Congress and for this committee. I believe, and not just because my name's on it, but I really do believe this legislation is groundbreaking, and I think it has the potential to reshape how the Federal Government manages its IT from soup to nuts as we move forward. I think it's some of the most groundbreaking legislation in the last 20 years. The Chairman cited one example, which is the CIO. There's a proliferation of Chief Information Officer titles in the Federal Government, and what can go wrong with that? Well, there's no one center of responsibility. And so what this bill attempts to do is to try to consolidate that and infuse that position with the responsibility for the allocation of resources and the management of that allocation, and somebody who then becomes accountable to the public, to the agency, and ultimately to Congress, too. I think that's a very important reform. And there are, as the Chairman said, there are other aspects of the bill that certainly I think both of us remain very open to hearing from those who think we didn't get it right. It's a work in progress, but it has been 6 months since the Chairman laid down a marker in September of last year, and I think we do need to move forward. Hopefully we have got it right, but if there are areas where we can improve, I know we're both committed to making sure we do that. But I proudly append my name to this bill, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to working with you and Mr. Cummings as we move forward to get it right and to make sure that the Federal Government, especially in the current climate, with sequestration actually kicking in on March 1, technology can be an enormous tool for good in Federal management, especially in these difficult times. So thank you again for your leadership, and I proudly look forward to supporting this legislation.
The gentleman yields back. I thank the gentleman. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? If there is no further discussion, I move that the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1232 to the House with the recommendation it do pass. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1232 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And anyone no? In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1232, the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, is ordered reported to the House. The committee will now consider H.R. 1211, the FOIA Oversight and Implementation Act of 2013. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1211, a bill to amend Section 552 of Title V, United States.
Without objection, H.R. 1211 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. H.R. 1211, the FOIA Oversight and Implementation Act, or FOIA Act, is a bipartisan bill introduced last week along with Ranking Member Cummings. The bill is a product of a joint effort of our staffs, and I'd like to particularly thank the staffs on both sides, because getting FOIA, a very difficult area and a technical area of government, right is important, and I also want to thank the transparency groups who have testified at the full committee hearing last Wednesday. A key provision of the FOIA Act is codification of requirements in FOIA memorandum issued by President Obama and Attorney General Holder. This includes making a presumption of openness standard in the law of the land. And I think for all of us, the bias toward it's the people's right to know is the essential part of this bipartisan bill. What this means is that agencies can only withhold if the disclosure of such records would cause foreseeable harm. This shifts the burden of proof from the public requester to the agency, which will now demonstrate why information needs to be withheld. The FOIA Act of 2013 also requires an unprecedented level of proactive disclosure. This means more information will be made available to the public without requesting or the need for it. This may, in fact, save agencies money because the process of FOIA is cumbersome and requires multiple reviews. Agencies will be required to post records requested 3 times or more to review the disclosed records of interest to the public. And again, I want to note that if multiple different groups are spending the time and money to ask for a FOIA disclosure, it certainly would seem that it's much better to make it available without asking than, in fact, to cause groups that don't know that somebody else already has that information to request it again. This is both expensive and cumbersome to both parties. Our goal is to proactively disclose requirements, is to make information sharing a routine part of government process. Certainly in the years since computer capability and web capability became virtually a no-cost item, we have lagged behind in the idea of posting government's activities in a way that the people can assert their rights. Like the Data Act, the FOIA Act would require all information be posted in an electronic, publicly accessible format, a raw data act. This would be available in its original form. And I want to make the point on this that what we're really talking about, and we hope that the states and the cities will follow, is that the common practice of posting PDFs that are printable but not searchable, that are printable but not easily read, that are printable but cannot be pulled out and merged with other information to create serious new reports of data from multiple sources, in fact, might seem like compliance, but it actually adds a layer of burdens and rolls us back to the day in which people photocopied and delivered paper. Photocopying and delivering paper must be part of the past. Under this bill, more Federal agencies will be using technologies to increase transparency by processing FOIA requests through FOIA Online, a new website that allows users to submit requests at one location and for agencies to automatically post responsive records online for the public access. Transparency is an essential part of accountable government, and FOIA is among the most important tools of transparency. As I said during the Sunshine Week hearing last week, when it comes to transparency, we can do better. I stole that line from the ranking member, who I will now recognize for his opening statement.
Thank you for giving me credit. My wife steals my lines all the time and never gives me any credit. Never.
Would you like to have that removed from the record for your own safety?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be joining you on this bipartisan bill. FOIA is our most important transparency law. However, the law has not been consistently implemented. During the Clinton administration, Attorney General Janet Reno declared that the Department of Justice would defend an agency's use of a FOIA exemption only when the agency reasonably foresees that foreclosure would harm an interest protected by that exemption. In the Bush administration, Attorney General Ashcroft reversed this standard and directed the Justice Department to defend an agency's decision to withhold records unless the agency lacked a sound legal basis for doing so. President Obama, on his first day in office, returned to an approach of openness. He directed agencies to implement FOIA with a presumption of openness. Attorney General Holder overturned the Ashcroft memo and reinstated the foreseeable harm standard. The FOIA Act would codify in law this presumption of disclosure no matter who the President is. The bill would require agencies, before withholding a record, to identify a foreseeable harm and find that the record falls under one of FOIA's exemptions. The FOIA Act would also create a pilot project to encourage participation in FOIA online. The FOIA portal run by EPA that allows requesters to use one website to file requests to multiple agencies. The pilot project is aimed at increasing participation and evaluating the benefits of a single FOIA portal. The bill would also strengthen the Office of Government Information Services by enhancing its role in providing guidance to agencies and ensuring that agencies notify requesters of their right to use its mediation services. The bill would strengthen the independence of this office by allowing it to send testimony and reports directly to Congress without approval from the Office of Management and Budget. Mr. Chairman, the committee has received feedback on this bill from some FOIA advocates in recent days. I hope that we can work together to make further improvements to the bill as it moves to the House floor. This is indeed a bipartisan effort. It's a good bill, and I urge every member to support it.
I thank the gentleman. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day, so any member who wishes to submit a written statement may. Does any member additionally wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? The gentleman from Ohio is recognized to offer an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
I request unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Let her begin, please.
Amendment 18.
Okay, thank you. Amendment to H.R. 1211 offered by Mr. Turner of Ohio.
The gentleman is recognized for his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank my colleague from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, for partnering with me as co-author of this amendment. From the onset, I would like to let the Chairman and Ranking Member know that we intend to withdraw this amendment after we have spoken on it and introduced it. Mr. Chairman, the Freedom of Information Act was enacted by Congress to provide the American public with access to information and bring transparency and openness to the executive branch. At times, though, the lines that separate government and private business have been blurred. Perhaps the clearest example of this is the taxpayer-funded TARP bailout. Under TARP, the Federal Government, through the Treasury Department, became the largest single shareholder of General Motors and at one time owned 92% of the insurance giant AIG. Under Federal Government control, billions in taxpayer dollars were spent funding their day-to-day operations. Under these circumstances, those institutions shed their status as private companies and become de facto arms of executive agencies. As such, it's appropriate that our laws reflect reality. That is, that these companies must be held to the same standards of transparency as the agencies that control them. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to co-author the amendment, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, for spearheading this and putting this together. I think the spirit in which we do this is openness and transparency to those that are fitting the bill, which is consistent with the mission statement of our committee. The second part of this amendment would make Fannie and Freddie subject to FOIA. Fannie, Freddie, FOIA. Try saying that 7 times. Fannie and Freddie have received $187 billion from the Treasury. They've paid back roughly $52 billion. The Federal Reserve has purchased some $1.5 trillion of these mortgage-backed securities. It seems to me that the taxpayer should have a right and an opportunity to be able to FOIA and make Fannie and Freddie subject to FOIA. So, again, I would encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. We are going to withdraw it, but I think we draw attention to this issue and look forward to working with the gentleman, Mr. Turner of Ohio, as we can continue to press forward on some more openness and transparency, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Although I know you're going to withdraw this amendment, and I do have concerns about some of the retroactivity that would potentially come from it, I want to support the gentleman's efforts and remind him perhaps that while I was honored to be on the Dodd-Frank conference, we dealt exactly with this problem of how do you open up, particularly Fannie and Freddie, to some sort of a reasonable FOIA rather than going to Treasury and hoping to get responses, which often you don't. They sort of say, we don't have it and we won't ask for it. So if there becomes an opportunity to incorporate some of this language specifically as to GSEs or any other entity that has become government, I would work with the gentleman. I would say that the simple investment in government by government in some private enterprise needs to be closely looked at. My hope is that we will never again have essentially a General Motors nationalization. But having said that, I look forward to working with the gentleman to incorporate for at least those entities which are truly ongoing government-like entities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that because this does illustrate one of the great loopholes in FOIA, because if the Federal Government spins off or acquires a private entity, even if it controls it or owns it wholly, currently it is shielded from FOIA, and I appreciate your support for a possible remedy for that.
The gentleman withdraws?
And with that, we withdraw the amendment.
Okay. Will next, does the gentlelady have an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 1211 offered by Ms. Duckworth of Illinois.
The gentlelady is, would they please distribute the amendments, and the gentlelady is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask the unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I am happy to have the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, co-sponsoring this amendment with me. We heard during testimony at this committee's hearing on government transparency last week that the most common complaint from FOIA requesters is unreasonable delays in agency response time. The Open Government Act of 2007 requires agencies to make determinations on FOIA requests within 20 working days. The law allows for an extension of this deadline, but only in unusual or exceptional circumstances. If agencies miss the 20-day deadline, they are prohibited from charging search and duplication fees. It's become clear, however, that agencies are often stretching or outright ignoring these rules. For example, fees are being assessed even if agency response time is well over the 20-day deadline, and since most agencies have failed to update their regulations to include the Open Act financial penalty provision, requesters may be unaware of its existence and of their ability to challenge the fees. Many agencies are also claiming that an acknowledgment of receipt of the request is enough to meet the deadline or are abusing the extension allowed for exceptional circumstances. If we're serious about government transparency, this type of foot-dragging should not be allowed to continue. My amendment would require any agency assessing fees after the 20-day deadline has passed to explain to the requester in writing why they believe they are not in violation of the financial penalty provision. Without this justification, the agencies would be prohibited from assessing fees. It would also require agencies to report each instance that fees are assessed for a determination that occurs after the 20-day deadline. I think these simple changes will go a long way in ensuring that agencies take timeliness more seriously while allowing them flexibility to explain any legitimate delays. I urge all members to support this common sense amendment and yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield back my time.
Thank you. Would you yield it to me?
I yield to the Chairman.
All right. Thank you. I'm a ranking member. It's
oh,
okay.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I did have my glasses on.
No. You're looking. You're looking into the future.
I trust the gentlelady's premonition is far in the future.
Mr. Chairman, and first of all, I want to thank the gentlelady for her amendment, and I certainly support this amendment. I think it's a very good amendment, and it's one which encourages agency compliance with FOIA's deadlines for responding to requests. The one thing we don't want is abuse of rules, and so that it works against what we're trying to do. This amendment still allows agencies the flexibility to charge fees if there are unusual or exceptional circumstances preventing a timely response. It simply requires agencies to identify the circumstances that justifies the fees. I mean, that just makes sense. This amendment also holds agencies accountable by requiring them to report how many times each year they charge fees for delayed responses. And again, I want to thank the gentlelady for her amendment. I think it's a great amendment, and I'll yield back to the lady.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cummings, and I yield my time back to the Chairman.
Thank you. We now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, a co-sponsor of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank the gentlewoman from Illinois for her leadership, her work on this amendment in addressing this problem. As she pointed out, the Federal agencies are required to report with and meet a 20-day deadline in responding to the FOIA requests. Unfortunately, they rarely do. We heard in a hearing in this committee just within the last few weeks, we heard testimony from Angela Canterbury with POGOs stating that out of 100 requests sent by that organization in February, only 8 out of 100 met the deadline. Meanwhile, many agencies are ignoring this pre-existing rule and continuing to charge fees for the search and duplications that are related to these FOIA requests, even if they've already missed the 20-day deadline. And as was pointed in that testimony, sometimes even responding to say that they've gotten the request meets the 20-day deadline, which I disagree with. This amendment is indeed a common-sense way to address this issue, and if agencies believe that they can assess fees past this 20-day deadline, they should be able to explain to the requester what their justification is for doing so. So again, I thank the Congresswoman from Illinois, Mrs. Duckworth, for her leadership and for working to make a more transparent government, and I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you're both doing a great job, that this was well thought out. I've conferred with the ranking member, and we're both very supportive of this amendment. We believe that, and I'll speak only for myself, if you pay for something, you're the customer. If you pay for it, you should get it on time. And if you don't get it on time, it is not uncommon for you to get what you asked for late but get it free, certainly when that occurs after when it would do you the most good. So I think this is well thought out. I hope that the agencies take note that this was broadly bipartisan and that it really is a message from the Congress. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
I just want to
the gentleman from—
What time is it?
You know what? It's your turn.
Okay.
You're recognized.
No, I just wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, I agree with what you just said. I want to make that clear, and I want to thank both of you. I thank Ms. Duckworth, but I also want to thank you. I think it says a lot when we make sure, and it's not just for this, but I think we send a message out to agencies that we're not going to allow them to do anything that might be abusive in any way to our constituents. And so, again, I want to thank you. And with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. If there's no further member seeking recognition, the question is on the amendment from the gentlelady from Illinois. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recommendation?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 19.
The gentleman's the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 1211 offered by Mr. Turner of Ohio.
The question unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read.
So ordered, and the gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is aimed at increasing government transparency by adding a straightforward, common-sense provision to the bill. This amendment would require the Government Accountability Office to issue a report on agency disclosure under FOIA by requiring the GAO to examine agency treatment of FOIA requests pertaining to entities receiving Federal bailouts. My amendment will provide taxpayers proper disclosure as to precisely how their hard-earned money is being spent. This is a companion to the amendment that Mr. Chaffetz and I offered and withdrew. With billions of dollars in taxpayer funds spent to acquire ownership stakes in some of the nation's largest financial institutions and the auto industry, to name a few, taxpayer access to this information is not merely appropriate, but is critically important. And this we're referring to information that's actually in the government's hands, not the hands of the private entity. The American public and Congress deserve to know precisely how transparent the executive branch is on these matters. My amendment merely requires the independent, nonpartisan GAO to issue this report so that taxpayers are provided with information as to the frequency of agency disclosure or declining disclosure on these matters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge adoption.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
I'm prepared to support this. I believe they will not be opposed by the ranking member either. I think that knowing where we stand is the first step toward determining whether a further piece of legislation requiring compliance would be necessary. So in the spirit of ready, aim before one fires, I would support the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
If no one else seeks recognition, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized to offer his amendment.
Amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 1211 offered by Mr. Mica of Florida.
The amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Florida is recognized to explain his amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And reviewing the FOIA legislation before the committee, and I know you've worked on this before, I think you've set forth some good provisions to try to make FOIA work, to make agencies responsible and providing access to information and documents. And I think that's a great effort and needed. If you look at the process, and actually I think with Ms. Duckworth, she set some milestones, but the process is set, and we also have a council, I guess, that's created under this to review, and Mr. Turner offered an amendment. But what I felt was lacking was someone other than the agency being responsible for oversight and requiring some compliance and moving forward. I actually look for some type of penalties also to be imposed for noncompliance. So to put someone in charge outside the process other than the agency itself, the Inspector General, who's an independent officer, we've asked to review agency compliance with the requirements of the Act. So we have someone responsible, again, for seeing that that the agency is responding, and someone who would periodically review compliance and make recommendations to the head of an agency. So I think this adds a valuable third-party involvement here. Then, as far as penalties, we also give the IG the ability and directive by law where it is appropriate to look at recommendations for disciplinary actions, and we outline that procedure in this amendment. So hopefully this will be a good amendment that has bipartisan support and can make this work.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
I want to thank the gentleman for working with both majority and minority staff. I realize that your original draft was slightly different, but I think that the work with staffs on both sides made this something that can really enhance the bill, and I thank you for your thoughtful work.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I will not oppose this amendment, which requires each agency Inspector General to review compliance with FOIA. Inspector Generals already can conduct reviews of FOIA compliance, and this amendment simply makes clear that each Inspector General should conduct such a review and identify specific issues that should be evaluated, such as the assessment of fees and whether fee waivers are being properly issued by the agency. This amendment also states that the agencies can discipline an employee for improperly withholding information. My understanding is that this is something agencies can already do. So this amendment just clarifies existing law. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. If there is no further discussion, the question is on the amendment from the gentleman from Florida. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. If there is no further discussion, I move the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1211 to the House with the recommendation it do pass, as amended. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1211 to the House as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1211, the FOIA Oversight and Implementation Act of 2013, is ordered reported to the House as amended. The committee will now consider H.R. 1162, the Government Accountability Office Improvement Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
1162, a bill to amend Title 31, United States Code to make improvements to the Government Accountability Office.
Without objection, H.R. 1262 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. As we know, the Government Accountability Office is a legislative branch agency that investigates how the Federal Government spends taxpayer dollars. Often called Congressional Watchdog or GAO, the GAO investigates instances of waste, fraud, and abuse in the Federal Government. This committee has jurisdiction over the GAO, and it is the pride and joy of this committee. Congress must have current information on Federal programs and how they are performing in order to both legislate effectively and to conduct meaningful oversight. H.R. 1162, the GAO Improvement Act, will enhance GAO's ability to serve Congress by, for instance, ensuring the agency has access to key data warehoused in the executive branch. This bill makes explicit in statute that GAO has access to key data it needs to perform its work, such as the National Directory of New Hires, which is often used to verify eligibility for Federal programs, to detect or prevent fraud, and to identify improper payments. 1162 will ensure GAO has the ability to obtain agency records and to administer oaths to witnesses when auditing accounts and investigating fraud. It will allow the Comptroller General to seek a judicial remedy to ensure GAO's right to information under the law. GAO has done an exemplary job for a very long time in protecting sensitive government information, including national security documents. The committee is confident GAO will continue to rigorously maintain confidentiality regarding information it obtains. In fact, we rely on them to be the nonpartisans when often we as members of Congress would not be as comfortable with partisan members seeing the same information in its raw form. I want to note that the language in this bill was included in the Data Act that was approved unanimously by the full House in the last Congress. I want to thank the ranking member for your partnership on this issue and urge passage by my colleagues, and I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Government Accountability Office Improvement Act will increase the effectiveness of GAO by clarifying and strengthening its authority in several critical areas, including access to records. Congress relies heavily on the GAO as a force multiplier in carrying out the investigative and oversight functions vested in the legislative branch. This legislation is necessary to ensure that GAO can successfully carry out all of its functions for the Congress. The GAO Improvement Act addresses a 2002 Federal Court decision that limited GAO's ability to question agency access determinations in court. The bill provides a Comptroller General with standing to pursue litigation if the Comptroller General determines that the performance of her official duties is harmed when an agency improperly withholds information. The bill also clarifies GAO's access to information in other key areas by confirming GAO's right to make and retain copies of records, authorizing GAO to administer oaths in certain circumstances, and specifically granting GAO access to certain information. A version of this legislation passed the committee and the House in the last Congress as a provision of H.R. 2146, the Data Act, to which it was added at my request. I supported it last Congress I urge members to support it now. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll hold the record open to the end of the day so all members can submit written statements. Does any member additionally wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? If there is no further discussion, I move that the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1162 to the House with the recommendation it do pass. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1162 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1162, the Government Accountability Office Improvement Act, is ordered reported to the House. The committee now consider H.R. 1133, the Presidential Library Donation Reform Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1133, a bill to amend Title 44 United States Code to require information on contributors to presidential library fundraising organizations and for other purposes.
Without objection, H.R. 1133 will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I'm going to submit my written statement for the record and recognize the author of the bill, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. This is about the most bipartisan bill that this committee could ever take up. It does not prohibit or limit donations any way. All it requires is disclosure of contributions over $200. There have been some abuses on this in the past, but this bill has passed the House, and I've supported it under both Republican and Democratic presidents to apply equally. The first time I introduced this bill, it passed unanimously out of this committee, and it passed the House by a vote of 392 to 3. The next two times, Chairman Waxman became the lead sponsor, and I became the lead co-sponsor. And in the next, after that, Chairman Towns became the lead sponsor, and I became the lead co-sponsor. And it passed the House three times, always by about the same margin, overwhelming margins. And I'm hopeful that we can pass this once again and get it finally acted on by the Senate. It's been endorsed by many people over the years, and I've received just a day or two ago a letter from the Sunlight Foundation endorsing this bill. And as you will recall, we had a witness from that foundation in here just a few days ago who mentioned this legislation very favorably at that time. And so the cost of these presidential libraries has shot way up. Recently, the Chicago Tribune quoted library experts as saying that the next presidential library could easily cost $500 million. And there's been in the past some, as I say, some abuses of some of these. There's even been some indications that I think some foreign countries have tried to curry favor by making contributions, and these things need to be disclosed as in the name of openness and accountability and good government. And I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your support of this legislation. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank Mr. Duncan for his leadership on this legislation, which he has reintroduced in various forms in several Congresses. This bill, like several of the bills we are considering today, is appropriate for Sunshine Week. It will bring transparency to donations made to support the construction of presidential libraries. Presidential libraries are funded through private donations, and presidents often begin fundraising for their libraries while they are still in office. President George W. Bush's Library Foundation is estimated to have raised $300 million. President Clinton's library cost an estimated $165 million. These libraries were built with donations from undisclosed contributors. This bill simply says that the identities of those who donate to support a presidential library should be disclosed. The bill has passed the House twice already. It should be law by now. Unfortunately, in 2008, the late Senator Ted Stevens objected to the bill when it came to the floor of the Senate because he wanted President Bush to be exempted from the bill's requirements. This is not and should not be a partisan measure. For that reason, I'm pleased to be a co-sponsor of this bill, and I hope that this time around it will finally make it to the President's desk. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I will hold the record open until the end of the day, so any member who would like to submit a written statement may. Does any additional member wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? If there is no further discussion, I move the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1133 to the House with the recommendation it do pass. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1133 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1133, the Presidential Library Donation Reform Act, is ordered reported to the House.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
The committee will now consider H.R. 1104, the Federal Advisory Committee Reform Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1104, a bill to amend the Federal Advisory Committee Act to increase the transparency of Federal.
Without objection, H.R. 1104 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I recognize myself for an opening statement. The Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA, is put in place to make Federal advisory committees more accountable and transparent and, importantly, independent from influence of special interests. The bill before the committee further increases the transparency and accountability of the more than 1,000 Federal advisory committees now in existence, as well as future ones. The bill protects the public's right to know by strengthening the disclosure requirements for panel members, creating more opportunities for public participation, and making advisory committee reports more readily available. I want to thank Representative Clay and Ranking Member Cummings for their leadership on this important issue. And with that, I recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Federal Advisory Committee Act includes key provisions intended to make advisory committees balanced and transparent. Over time, however, agencies have found ways to circumvent the law. For example, the Government Accountability Office has found that agencies have at times improperly designated committee members as representative members rather than special government employees to avoid complying with ethics laws. Under the Federal Advisory Committee Act amendments, agencies would be required to disclose how the advisory members are chosen, whether they have a financial conflict of interest, and if they are appointed to provide their own expertise, and who they work for if they are representing industry. I want to thank Mr. Clay for his leadership on this issue and for introducing this bill again, and I yield him the remainder of my time.
Thank you. I thank the Ranking Member Cummings, also thank the Chairman for his cooperation on this bill. And last week, Ranking Member Cummings and Mr. Connolly and I introduced a new bill to amend the Federal Advisory Committee Act. It will greatly enhance the transparency, oversight, independence, and public accountability of Federal advisory committees. This bill opens up the Federal Advisory Committee selection and oversight process by providing greater transparency and ensuring real independence for appointees. The legislation also imposes much tougher standards to ensure that committee members are insulated from political pressure to influence their recommendations. The Act would also require any contractor designated by the President or agency who selects FACA appointees to provide expert advice, to fully comply with all conflict of interest rules and Federal ethics laws. Finally, a key provision of the new Act would close a gaping loophole in the current FACA law by making it absolutely clear that FACA applies to subcommittees just as it does to committees. And the H.R. 1104 also requires Federal agencies to disclose detailed info about the composition of all advisory committees. Agencies must disclose the members of each committee, how the members were chosen, and in the case of a member who represents a stakeholder interest, the agency must disclose the interest being represented and the justification for appointing the member. And Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cummings, again, let me express my thanks to both of you for handling this important common sense legislation in such a positive bipartisan manner, and I urge my colleagues to adopt and support. I yield back.
And the gentlelady yields back. No, it was a gentlelady's time. Oh, no, it was a gentleman's time. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, since we only got 4 seconds, well.
There wasn't much to yield back. Okay. The gentleman yields back. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day for members to submit written statements. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? If there is no further discussion, I move the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1104 to the House with the recommendation it do pass. The question is unfavorably reporting H.R. 1104 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. H.R. 1104, the Federal Advisory Committee Reform Act, is ordered reported to the House. At this time, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that H.R. 1134, the Electronic Message 1234, the Electronic Message Preservation Act, which was not previously scheduled but was anticipated to be included in H.R. 1233, be able to be considered as a separate bill, even though it did not receive 3 days' notice. Hearing no opposition, is unanimously agreed to and be brought up in regular order. The committee will now consider H.R. 1246, the District of Columbia Chief Financial Officer Vacancy Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1246, a bill to amend the District of Columbia Home Rule Act to provide that the District of Columbia Treasurer or one of the deputies.
Without objection, H.R. 1246 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I'll now recognize myself for a short opening statement. I would like to thank the gentlelady from the District of Columbia. Ms. Holmes Norton has done a wonderful job, once again, of recognizing a potential problem to the District of Columbia, one that has existed for many years. Under current law, neither she nor Mayor Gray would be able to replace and possibly not be able to lawfully sign for funds expended by the District of Columbia under the Home Rule Act if the current CFO were to become disabled or if there were to be a vacancy. Upon the announcement on February 1st of Dr. Gandhi's intention to retire effective June 1st, this became something that the delegate brought to my attention. She crafted a thoughtful piece of legislation, and working with staff on both sides, I believe we have an acceptable piece of legislation today. Again, this is a longstanding challenge, and one that I would hope that working with the District of Columbia we could verify in any and all locations has been satisfactorily maintained. The District of Columbia operates under a number of unique requirements, including the Home Rule Act. For that reason, I want to thank the gentlelady, Ms. Norton, for her work and her timely fashion of bringing this so that we could rectify any potential ambiguity as to the vacancy and the ability of our Federal city to continue to operate. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I, too, share your views with regard to Ms. Norton. I've said it behind her back and to her face that she's got to be one of the hardest working members of Congress and always very vigilant, and this is another example of her vigilance and her hard work. And I certainly support the legislation. And with that, I will yield my time to Ms. Norton.
I want to thank the member for yielding and for his kind words. And I want to thank both the ranking member and, of course, the chairman for enabling this bill to get on today's markup. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for continuing to work with us to improve the efficiency of the District of Columbia, and even beyond that, to working with us on bills that are of utmost importance to the District of Columbia. You have been very important to the progress we have made. This is but the latest example. The provision we are speaking about, I will not bother to explain in great detail. You've done so very well. But the District of Columbia has a provision that is probably unique in the United States, where there is a non-elected official, in this case the Chief Financial Officer, who must approve expenditures or before they are made, as well as obligations. Seems to be a hole in the bill. We're not certain. You could argue. Lawyers might argue it both ways. But when it comes to whether you can expend your money or obligate your money, any lawyer worth his salt would say err on the side, on the most conservative side. And that's what we have done and what the mayor believes was appropriate to do. The uncertainty comes when a vacancy is created. One can imply the power of the mayor to fill that vacancy, but the fact is that the bill does not contain that authority. When that authority is not specifically in a bill, Federal law provides for Federal officials ways to fill the vacancy. That has happened in the Federal government before. So we looked to Federal law to see how that is done, and essentially we took from Federal law exactly how it's done there, looked for comparable officers in the District of Columbia. That's the D.C. Treasurer and other officers who are comparable to to how the Federal vacancy would be filled. The danger is this: even if, and we have asked, I have asked, so as the mayor asked the CFO to extend the date of leaving in case they haven't done the proper vetting. We want the broadest vetting, the broadest nationwide search to stay in this case, since the hole may be in the bill. But even if there were no hole in the bill, even if there was an ability to appoint right away, there's a 30-day period that Congress has put into the bill for review and comment. So if the CFO was to leave tomorrow, there would still be 30 days with nobody to expend, to obligate money or to allow the district to spend money if one gives a strict reading to the present law. I very much appreciate that at a time when the district's rating is probably the best in the country, when it has a growing not deficit. I'm so used to saying the word surplus. That's a hard word to think of over here. Over $1 billion, when they've just come back from Wall Street and received all kinds of compliments. I think we'd like to make sure that nobody could look with suspicion on this bill. And I am sure Congress did not mean to leave any gap in the bill, and may not have. But in case they did, you, Mr. Chairman, I think understanding Wall Street very well and understanding how these matters could be construed, agreed readily to put this bill on today. And I am very grateful that you have, and I offer my thanks again and ask that this bill be passed.
Thank you. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day, so all members who would like to submit written statements may. Does any member additionally wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? If there is no further discussion, I move that the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1246 to the House with a recommendation it do pass. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1246 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1246, the District of Columbia Chief Financial Officer Vacancy Act, is ordered reported to the House. The committee will now consider H.R. 1233, the Presidential and Federal Records Act amendments of 2013. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1233, a bill to amend Chapter 22 of Title.
Without objection, H.R. 1233 will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in your folders. I'll now recognize myself for a short opening statement. H.R. 1233, a bill introduced by Mr. Cumming, contains provisions identical to legislation this committee reported in the 112th Congress. Like its predecessor legislation, this bill codifies the existing executive order that allows former presidents to appeal to the incumbent presidents to keep certain presidential documents privileged under the Presidential Records Act. The bill would put into statute an executive order issued by then-President Reagan in 1989, restored by President Obama in 2009, and used without controversy by 4 of the last 5 presidents, including the current one. It thus fulfills a procedural gap in the Presidential Record Act, which does not provide a way for former presidents to ask for the extension of privileges of previously withheld documents. This codification does not expand the limits of executive privileges, nor does it give former presidents custodial rights over their administration's presidential records, which belong to the American people. The bill also takes steps to modernize the Federal Government's record-keeping infrastructure. It allows Federal agencies to turn over records to the National Archives on a regular basis without sacrificing legal custody of the documents. This means they need not self-store the documents for 30 years, a process which almost guarantees some information is lost. It also eliminates the so-called print-to-file rule, which actually encourages agencies to print out their electronic files and send the paper records to the National Archives, a practice that in this day and age is both reprehensible, unsustainable financially, and irresponsible. Good government demands good record keeping, and it is important that we update our laws to the realities of the email era and the Internet. I now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I introduced the Presidential Federal Records Act amendments to ensure that the presidential records are released in a timely manner. Under this bill, current and former presidents would have up to 90 days to object to the release of records, or those records would automatically be released. President George W. Bush issued an executive order that limited public access to presidential records. Under that executive order, a president's heir or designee could assert privilege over the president's records. One of the first things President Obama did when he took office was to revoke that executive order and restore the presumption that only living presidents have the right to assert privilege. The bill we are considering today makes clear that the right to assert privilege is personal to current and former presidents, and it cannot be bequeathed to assistants, relatives, or descendants. Putting this language into statute will ensure that future presidents are held to the standard first set by President Reagan. This bill also includes a number of amendments to the Federal Records Act, which were proposed by Chairman Issa last Congress. For example, the bill allows agencies to transfer records to the National Archives and Records Administration for processing and release sooner than when the agency is statutorily required to do so. The Chairman will be offering a manager's amendment that makes a number of additional changes to the bill, many of which I support. I will talk more about that amendment at the appropriate time. I hope every member will support the Presidential and Federal Records Act amendments.
Thank you.
I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Hold the record open to the end of the day for members who would like to submit written statements. Does any member wish to additionally speak on the bill? The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This legislation under consideration today would take important strides to modernize the Presidential and Federal Records Act. In particular, the Chairman's substitute amendment makes an important update to the bill by putting in place additional safeguards for ensuring transparency in agency correspondence. One example of why the Chairman's amendment is so crucial to this bill is illustrated in a production that the Treasury Department made to this committee following a request for documents that the Chairman and I made regarding the mistreatment of Delphi salary retirees. In 3 pages of emails turned over to the committee, Harry Wilson, a Treasury employee and a member of the President's Auto Task Force, used 3 separate email accounts to correspond with employees at General Motors, the Treasury Department, and outside contractors, both his official account, Gmail account, and an alumni account from his alma mater. With Mr. Wilson's personal email accounts outnumbering his official accounts 2 to 1, In these communications, it is clear that greater safeguards are needed to strengthen our laws and increase accountability. In other words, he is communicating more from personal email accounts than from government email accounts. It's important that these emails be made available if transparency is to be guarded. With that, I would like to ask that the emails that we received as examples be placed into the record of today's business meeting, and I urge adoption.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does any member wish to speak? Additional member wish to speak on the bill? If not, it is the bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? I do. Would the clerk please read my amendment?
Amendment to H.R. 1233, offered by Mr. Issa of California.
I recognize myself to speak on the amendment. This amendment has been worked out with the ranking member and is intended to go that one step further. We want to put to an end the all too common practice by, and I use the word executive branch employees because this piece of legislation pertains to them, of using personal email, instant mail, Twitter, and others in order to do communications, and that in communications not being gathered under the Presidential Record Act, and similarly 1234, which will be offered next. It is clear that in this age in which one device, such as my iPhone here, can have 5 or 6 or 7 different accounts, it is possible to have an inadvertent mistake. For that reason, we anticipate in this amendment that an inadvertent correspondence certainly can be corrected simply by CCing, to use an old term, or later forwarding a private email back into the public record so it's captured in its entirety. Only in the case of a willful or deliberate attempt to circumvent the capture of this information would there be any penalties under the amendment. I believe it's important to send a message that willfully circumventing the Presidential Records Act should, in fact, be a violation and could lead to make someone subject to adverse action, while at the same time recognizing that there will be communications that inadvertently falls outside official channels and that we want to have it recaptured voluntarily in a timely fashion. For that reason, I offer the amendment expecting that it will be well received both here on the House floor, and I yield back. The gentleman seek recognition. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly not going to oppose this amendment, and I appreciate your willingness to work with me in accommodating concerns I raised earlier with earlier proposals. I also take a moment to thank your staff and my staff for working together to get this resolved. There is nothing currently in the Presidential Records Act or the Federal Records Act that prohibits employees from using personal email accounts to conduct official business. There are situations that require White House or agency employees to use personal email. For example, the White House has experienced problems with its email servers several times in the last few years. During those times, employees couldn't access their official email accounts. This amendment would continue to allow employees to use their personal email account when necessary, but it requires employees to copy their official email account or forward their email to their official account. The amendment also makes clear that agencies can discipline employees for intentional violations of the Presidential Records Act or the Federal Records Act. I hope that the Chairman will continue to work with me in getting the feedback of the National Archives and Records Administration to ensure this language will work as intended. With that caveat, I do not oppose the amendment, and again, I want to thank you for working with us.
I thank the gentleman, and I will work with the ranking member to ensure that the archives are satisfied with the bills that we are passing here today. If there is no further members seeking recognition, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by myself. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. If there is no further amendments, if there is no further discussion, I move the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1233 to the House with the recommendation that the bill do pass as amended. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1233 to the House as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1233, the Presidential and Federal Records Act amendments of 13 is ordered reported to the House as amended. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make necessary and conforming technical changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. I know there is a degree of sadness, but I now call up the last bill of today, H.R. 1234. The committee will now consider H.R. 1234, the Electronic Message Preservation Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1234, a bill to amend Title 44 United States Code to require.
Without objection, H.R. 1234 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed, as in each of your folders. I now recognize myself briefly for an opening statement. H.R. 1234, a bill was introduced again by Mr. Cummings and contains provisions identical to legislation reported in the 112th Congress. I support this legislation. Again, many of the same areas will be dealt with, including ensuring that the National Archives are supportive, that we capture the information through electronic files, and ultimately, this is about the kind of good government modernization that Congress needs to act on, and I want to thank the ranking member for acting on this and ensuring it got in today's markup, and I recognize the chairman.
I want to thank you also, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your cooperation in moving this bill today. The Electronic Message Preservation Act ensures that email records from Federal agencies in the White House are preserved. According to the National Archives and Records Administration, over 80% of the agencies continue to print and file hard copies of email messages. This means that these records are more likely to get lost and that they are harder for the agency to retrieve during record searches under the Freedom of Information Act. H.R. 1234 would require the archivists of the United States to issue regulations mandating that within 4 years of enactment, all Federal agencies manage and preserve their email records electronically. Archivist David Ferrero has said that he supports the goals of this bill. In his words, the government cannot be open and accountable if it does not preserve and cannot find its records. On August 24, 2012, the Acting Director of the Office of Management and Budget and the Archivist issued a memorandum to agencies requiring that agencies manage all permanent electronic records in an electronic format by the end of 2019. The bill we are considering would push agencies a little harder to accomplish that goal with regard to emails within 4 years. H.R. 1234 would also direct the archivists to establish standards for the preservation and management of email records and to annually certify that the White House has records management controls in place that meet those standards. Under this bill, the archivists must report 1 year after the President leaves office on whether the controls used by the President met the required standards. The White House currently has a system in place that captures emails, performs automatic backups, and provides a searchable online archive. However, previous administrations have experienced significant problems with archiving emails. This legislation would ensure that every President has the controls in place that are necessary to preserve emails and other electronic records. I urge every member of the committee to ensure we have a complete historical record by supporting the legislation. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll hold the record open to the end of the day. Some members who would like to submit the written statements may. Any other member wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? I do. It will be the same amendment. The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 1234, offered by Mr. Issa of California.
I recognize myself for brief explanation. This amendment is the same as the previous bill. For the same reasons, I believe that it meets that requirement. I will express an additional concern at this moment, and that is that this second bill, and I think it was wise that the ranking member asked to have them split, this is where most of the dollars are. This is a new requirement. It will capture significant more information. It will create the transparency that capturing that information does. So I look forward to working post the passage of this bill with the committees to assure them that although we would like to have an immediate implementation, that we need to find ways to do this within a constrained budget. We need to find it a way in which CBO's score will not prevent the passage of the underlying effort to begin putting online and available the records gathered and the correspondence of all the Federal agencies and Federal employees in their official duties. And with that,
I support the amendment and yield back.
There we go. And with that, the question. Okay. If there's no further seeking recognition on the amendment, the question is offered on agreeing to the amendment offered by myself. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. If there are no further amendments or discussion, I move the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report H.R. 1234 to the House with the recommendation the bill do pass as amended. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 1234 to the House as amended. All those in favor of signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1234, the Electronic Message Preservation Act, is ordered reported to the House as amended. I ask unanimous consent the staff be authorized to make necessary and conforming technical changes to the bill without objection. So ordered, and we stand adjourned.